You're listening to In Network, Nordic's podcast series where we explore healthcare and technology with experts from around the globe.
Hello, and welcome to the In Network podcast feature, Designing for Health. I'm Nordic's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Craig Joseph. I recently sat down with Brendan Keeler, Interoperability and Data Liquidity Practice Lead at HTD Health. We discussed his technical background and experiences on the EHR vendor side, the increasing complexity of interoperability, and the data differences between e-prescribing and prior authorization. We also talked about the current state of data use and access litigation, the potential impact those disputes may have on physicians and hospitals, and what the broader implications are for the healthcare industry. Let's plug in. Brendan, welcome to the pod. How are you today?
Doing great. It's a Friday. Thanks for having me.
And where do we find you today?
I'm in Portland, Oregon, somehow in the craziness of conference fall and just, all the travel for, work, but also I have a new nephew. So a little bit of that. So going to see him in Denver.
So you spend time in different parts of the country.
Yeah, I bounce around. I was just in Nashville earlier this week. I'm going to Denver, as mentioned, and my parents are from Philadelphia. So spread all out.
Okay. And it's probably a good idea for you to just stay like one step ahead of the law. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're after me for antitrust or information blocking.
Excellent. Well, we'll get into that because I don't even understand any of that stuff. So let's talk about your past. My understanding is you are an interoperability guru, and have you always wanted to be an interoperability guru? Was that your goal in kindergarten?
I can't claim that. That's a protected title. I haven't made that to that. I'm an interoperability sensei right now, but working my way up to guru. But no, I mean, I fell sort of ass backwards into it out of college. Went up to work for Epic just because I needed a job and thought it was, the video game software. Actually, it sounded cool. I got to work up there in interoperability and integration because I protested against being a pure play engineer. And they said, okay, you can do something equally dorky, connecting all the systems as part of implementations. Did that domestically, did that abroad in the Netherlands for a number of years. And then I've done that ever since in different roles and capacities across 5 or 6 companies now.
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. So after the fun stint at Epic, I went to a company called Redox that helps applications connect to health systems to integrate. I then went to work for Jonathan Bush of Athena Health fame, which was a really fun ride at Zeus Health, working on health information exchange. And then was head of product at Flexpa, which provided patient authorized access to claims data to other applications. I now work at HTD Health. And HTD Health is a strategic consultancy and development agency focused. My particular practice is focused on interoperability. And so I provide subject matter expertise, but executive partnership on any projects that we have related to health information exchange, all the interoperability topics we're talking about today, EHR integration, or just general strategy as we have more and more and more connections between systems.
All right. So you have convinced me that you know more about interoperability than I do. So let me ask you a question. So you go right out of college with some sort of computer science degree, I'm assuming, or something along those lines. And you know nothing about healthcare. Is that true at that time?
I have 2 parents. My parents are both in healthcare, urologists, a long line of urologists. So my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather were all urologists. And then my mom is a registered nurse.
Oh, wow. And so how did you end up not being a urologist?
I worked for some twins in a lab at one of the Philadelphia hospitals in high school, and did not like sticking my hand and feeling the beating heart of a what was it, a sheep they were dissecting or like doing research on, kind of alienate me to like the pure play act of medicine, but deep appreciation for all those that are doing those things, and obviously for my parents.
So how do you learn about all the aspects of healthcare that you hadn't learned about? Is that just kind of an on-the-job thing that Epic offers, or is there a class, or is it just kind of go learn as you go?
Yeah, I mean, Epic does have like the 3 months of onboarding, but really, part of their model is to bring smart, or maybe not for me, not smart, but at least some smart people right out of college, throw them into the grinder, and the ones that succeed and can work long hours, that can battle through tough implementations and pick up what's necessary, are the ones who make it past a year or 2 years, and then it is trial by fire and learning through the industry. And so I think of Epic in a lot of ways as a second college, a second university, both in terms of learning, and also I got to live in the Netherlands for 4.5 years. I had a lot of fun too.
Yeah, that is not a horrible life. So let me just ask you the question I think most of us in healthcare wonder: why is this so difficult? Why is this so complicated? This is what I used to hear when I worked for that software company. I can take my ATM card and go to any country and get money out, and it all seems to work. Yet you can't send a list of diagnoses across the street.
Yeah, I mean, interoperability is tough because it is a large superset of smaller workflows. And if you think about it in that light, like payment, the act of payment, which you're alluding to, building those rails is relatively easy because one, there's a forcing function and mutually aligned incentives to get it done. And two, it's a relatively simple transaction. People in the fintech and banking would dispute that, the speed of payments, like fraud prevention, things like that. But at the end of the day, it's a debit and a credit. It's a movement of money. And so when you think about healthcare workflows, there's a number of different along different maturities that exist. And so solving each of those at a ubiquitous national or international level is really hard. And as you look at each of those, there's not always as clear as incentive to build the rails, to invest in those rails rather than to rely on the existing ubiquitous method, which is phone call or even fax. And those are strong network effects because they work at scale. I can call the other hospital, I can fax the other hospital, I can fax the pharmacy. Whereas, when you're building digital infrastructure to replace a workflow, when it only works for 1 out of 10, or the hospital down the street, it's not as the efficacy isn't there, and so you'll default to the thing that always works versus something that works some of the time. So that's one reason it's hard, is that there's so many different workflows. There's e-prescribing, there's referrals, there's clinical data exchange with other providers, there's clinical data exchange with payers, there's interactions with payers for claims and eligibility. And there's hundreds of these different workflows that each are not the same transaction type. They're not the same data set. And they are also different levels of solved or semi-solved or mature.
Okay. So what's solved? Like, what do you think that's just, hey, yeah, we've been there, done that, we've moved on?
I don't want to call it solved, but ubiquitous, right? Like there's room for improvement, as we've seen with Change Healthcare in the spring, but claims is relatively digitized, right? You can send a digital claim. E-prescribing is relatively digitized. You can reliably send a prescription, typically over Surescripts, in a digital fashion to a pharmacy. And so, like, while those are definitely, you can look at them and zoom in on those parts of interoperability and say we can make that better, and there are people doing so. In the grand scheme of things, like, providers would say, oh, well, I don't fax or phone call that stuff usually. It's digitized, it's semi-solved. Whereas, things like referrals, things like prior authorization, things like claims denials, like those are less solved workflows that are still heavily manual. They fall back to the ubiquitous solution, the solution of phone calls, the solution of fax. And so you can plot things along that spectrum, and you can see we still have a lot of work to do because there are still many problems that are not ubiquitous national infrastructure that can be relied on by providers, relied on by pharmacists, relied on by payers' operations teams.
Why do you think that we're much further ahead for like e-prescribing than we are for prior authorization? Is it simply that was the priority at the time, or was there government incentive to solve one problem over another? or is it just too complicated?
No, it's a mixture of aligned incentives and artful network building by private actors and right tailwinds from regulatory action. So if you look at e-prescribing, certainly it's in the interests of providers and pharmacies to digitize that transaction. It's not so long ago in the 2000s that you were faxing or printing out scripts and people were bringing them. People can lose them, and then there's not an advance notice to the pharmacy that they need to start prepping the medication. And so there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of pain. There's a chance for fraud, right? Like there's certainly you can go get the script and scribble something and like maybe that bring that with you to the pharmacy to get some controlled meds. And so there was some incentive alignment there. There were industry players, namely RX Hub and SureScripts, that provided services to supplement that, namely the medication history pull from the pharmacies or from the PBMs to start, but now the pharmacies as well, and also the active e-prescription. And so they were building into the 2000s, and then the government said, this is really important for us from a zoom in on interoperability standpoint to incentivize to make sure we get done at national level. And so they backed the standard NCPDP, and basically SureScripts became the de facto solution to such an extent they were sued by the FTC not so long ago for monopoly because they grew ubiquitous. And ubiquitous national solution like that oftentimes converges on a monopoly, which can have antitrust implications if they behave anti-competitively. And so while antitrust and monopolies are not necessarily a good thing, ubiquitous infrastructure is. And so we can consider ourselves pretty lucky, because when I went over to the Netherlands in 2014, I helped stand up the first e-prescribing. They were starting to incentivize e-prescribing. So with Epic, we did the first e-prescribing connectivity over there. And it was just nascent. It was just so far behind. I was blown away, but it's because they focused on different subsets of interoperability to incentivize, to push forward. And so you look over there, digital image exchange, diagnostic images between hospitals, not ubiquitous yet, but almost ubiquitous, such that I can, for Brendan, see prior radiology images and things like that. And we don't have that at all here. And so you can just zoom in different countries and see how they've focused on different problem sets, different digitization of manual workflows by deciding and prioritizing. In a lot of ways, the government can act as the product manager writ large for the nation, for national infrastructure. And their bets don't always work out, just like a product manager's bets don't always work out. But they have unique influence and unique power to help stitch together, what would otherwise be free market competition, which can on its own can converge to national infrastructure, but is much harder because of less incentive alignment.
So kind of continuing along those lines. So the government doesn't own the rails. They don't own the phone lines, right? Either for us old people to kind of understand, but they do own or often can point to standards, right? So are there standards so we hear about? Well, I don't know if we all hear. You hear about fire. You hear about other things. Maybe kind of walk us through what are some of the high level standards and where do they come from? I don't think they come from the government. They come from consortia of just kind of organizations that are out there, right? Kind of how does that all work? Explain everything about standards in the next 2 minutes, Brendan, please.
I will try and do as much as I can. Standards can come in a lot of ways. In some countries, they are government created and mandated. The government goes into the little innovation lab and they come up with a way of encoding data or sending data over up the pipe, or transport standards, for content standards, and then they release it to the world and mandate it. The U.S. is not built like that. At least definitely not in healthcare. Very rarely in other industries as well. Instead, they look for industry adopted standards where groups of even competitors come together to say, these are the agreed upon formats that we will use to transfer meds or to send a continuity of care document. Or in banking, there's the FDX standard, which is for open banking, for retrieval of banking data via patient authorization or consumer authorization. And so they look for industry standards that have been proven with some adoption in like pilots or small atomic networks. And then they say, okay, let's move this up the maturity curve, and then let's either require it in different ways, or incentivize it or recommend it in different ways to promote it. And so that is just a different methodology. It just comes from the way we're structured as a country, right? The federal government doesn't have a ton of power in a lot of ways compared to other countries to mandate, to require things because of the federal state interactions, as well as our history as a state of a union of 50 states. And so we end up with a number of different interesting, elaborate levers to get standards promoted, particularly the EHR certification program through the former ONC, Office of National Coordinator, but now the ASTP. They renamed themselves. They did a rebrand over the summer. They have a voluntary health technology certification program, totally voluntary. Nobody has to do it. No reason to do it, except that their partners, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, requires it for anyone that wants to, either hospitals that want to submit claims for Medicare, or physicians involved in the MIPS program. And so that double lever of like, here's a voluntary certification program, you don't have to do it, but then you kind of do have to do it to get this higher reimbursement, is the way today those things are primarily incentivized and promoted. Historically, there was meaningful use, which had more active, like, here's $50,000, go use an EHR type incentives. That doesn't really exist today. We instead have a more elaborate series of levers and contraptions to incentivize.
Are there multiple ways to kind of skin the cat, so to speak? Are there, we hear about APIs, I don't know, and there are other other combinations. Is there one health system that might say, well, we think that prior auths should use this format, and another, or maybe it's not the hospital system, it's the EHR vendor. Where is there controversy there? Or is it pretty much, we acknowledge that that's the standard, we're just not there yet, but we're moving in that direction?
It varies, like by standard, by use case. You see standards battles. There was back in the day, there was a battle, not really well publicized, between HL7, one of the major standards bodies, and NCPDP over medication transfer. And they sort of divided and conquered and agreed, they did a handshake where they passed the mantle of like e-prescription over to NCPDP, but then medication exchange within the hospital between systems to HL7. You certainly see controversies today over should we use FHIR, the new standard, or a more legacy standard called CDA, for the exchange of data between providers, for when I step out and get hit by a bus, and then have to go over to OHSU, and they need to pull my information from the variety of places I've lived across the US. Should that be one standard or the other? I think my personal opinion is that those are silly fights. That people are just playing for their own interest of where they place their bets, what they invested into. Content standards, by and large, have like minimal advantages, disadvantages. They're just tools. And at the end of the day, if I can get the meds, allergies, and problems ubiquitously to any provider in the country, that is the barometer for success. And then you can always update to newer standards and over time, once you've built a ubiquitous digital infrastructure. So I'd rather people fight for that ladder point and push towards that ladder point than get caught up in, FHIR, HL7, CDA, X12. They're all sending, it's like trying to argue whether English or Spanish is a better language or something like that, right? Like they convey meaning in different formats with different grammar and words. But at the end of the day, they're conveying thought. And so if you think about that parallel of speech and transmission over language, which we're getting pretty deep with metaphor here, but you see that it's not really the point. Like the point is not English or Spanish. The point is, can we talk?
Okay. So there's not this takes me back to kind of the early 80s. The best time, I think we can all agree.
I was born in the 80s. So
okay, let's not get into details here, Brendan. There was listen, this is very important. There was VHS versus Betamax. And two different standards about how videotapes were going to work. And I'm not sure one was better than the other, but there were two different standards. The difference, though, I think between that situation and the current situation is that there were companies that had money at stake, and that's not the case, right? We're not seeing arguments between Oracle Health or maybe we are, between Oracle Health and Epic in the United States, or a big EHR vendor or other vendors in Europe. Or is it simply just, well, we've invested in this and we'd like this to work, but we don't really, because we don't want to do a lot of extra work. It's not, have I opened up a can of worms, Brendan?
Well, I mean, it's a fun and interesting time and year in that I don't know if it's the tightening of of funding across the digital health industry. I don't know if it's sort of the cyclical nature of legislative, then regulatory, then judicial. But we're certainly seeing a push in judicial, in fights, in spats, and that could be Oracle versus Epic, and they're not suing each other, but they are in this sort of turf war where one of their leading marketing people like put out a letter, sort of, I don't know if it's a technical term, shit talking Epic. And then Seema Verma, who's former head of CMS, but now works for Oracle, has been doing a lot of verbiage about Epic being a big blocker to interoperability. And Epic, who historically does not respond in kind, does not do marketing, has been doing some responses, has been pushing back. So that's a minor version of it. At more macro level, we see a dispute. We see disputes between apps and EHR vendors over data access, over use of the rails that are being built. And so in particular, we have Particle Health, which is an on-ramp to these health information exchanges that serve for clinical data exchange between providers and other players. Has a dispute with Epic dating back to the spring on whether rails that were built for treatment exchange of clinical data for treatment purpose of use, so that when you're hit by a bus, Dr. Smith can see it, even though you're 5,000 miles away from where you live. Whether that can be used by payers, by lawyers, by non-treating entities. And so they had a dispute with Epic, and then that progressed over the summer, and then they actually sued Epic for antitrust, saying that Epic used its market power in ways that were anti-competitive. And so that happened in September and is obviously going to continue for a long time. It's not the only thing. We see an application, Real-Time Medical Systems, that provides analytics to skilled nursing facilities. They've sued Point-Click Care, which is the largest skilled nursing facility EHR in the country that people just don't know about. They know about Epic and the inpatient ones, but this is the Epic of skilled nursing facilities. They're very, very large. They sued them for information blocking, for that, saying that Point-Click Care was inappropriately preventing them, with the permission of skilled nursing facility shared customers, from accessing the health information needed to provide those analytics. And so big, dramatic, capital D dramatic events that are happening in the industry now that the average provider doesn't really see, but could drastically influence their day-to-day, when all of a sudden their ability to see this outside data, the meds, allergies, problems of Brendan being hit by a bus, goes away all of a sudden. That's one implication. Or that they are radically empowered to choose the application of their choosing to sit alongside their EHR in ways that deeply integrate beyond what they can do today. There's high upside and high downside to the capital D drama that we're seeing. And I don't think a lot of providers know about it, and maybe they shouldn't, but I think every hospital CEO should be intentionally and acutely watching these things and weighing in on these things, because they are losing at the highest level. That's the impact of the doctor. But at the highest level, right now, providers are in an asymmetric relationship with payers, where data is flowing freely to payers, and they are getting no information, no care gaps, no claims data to build out their longitudinal picture in return. And so if the CEOs, if the C-suite of hospitals aren't paying attention and just pretend like it's not happening, then they're going to continue to have more and more of an asymmetric relationship where they are disadvantaged against payers rather than collaborating with payers and getting more symmetry and more equitable data exchange.
Okay. Well, so that's interesting. So the I was going to say fights, arguments, lawsuits, debate.
All of the above.
It's more not. It's not so much about how the information is exchanged. It's about the information itself, right? Like you had mentioned. There's one of many lawsuits that's happening because. Or if I'm not sure if that's directly where the lawsuit's coming from, but essentially, hey, you're using this information that you said was for treatment of the patient, but you're not treating any patients. And so you shouldn't have, that's one of the assertions that you don't deserve this information because you were not authorized to get it by the patient specifically. And you're not treating the patient in general, right? Did I simplify that correctly?
Yeah, that's the crux of the dispute, and whether that's right or wrong. That the infrastructure was built for treatment, and that the way that the data was accessed hypothetically was for treatment, or claimed to be for treatment, but potentially was not. And I think people on the one side would say, well, it was for a very lightweight treatment, and then we received a HIPAA authorization, and we can do what we want with it. And the people on the other side would say, well, you stood up that treatment, that single doc telehealth practice, solely to funnel data to lawyers or to pharma or to payers so you can make money. And that doesn't feel right. And that feels asymmetric. And so I don't see right or wrong. I just see an opportunity for us to think critically about serving payers, lawyers, individuals, these other use cases that are underserved. That the fact that they are underserved and unable to access data for, in the case of payers, care management, HEDIS measures, quality measures. In the case of lawyers, mass tort, or trials that require health information. In the case of the patient, controlling their own patient information and directing their care. These are all valid use cases, and they've chosen to use workarounds and asymmetric relationships that are opaque and actually have a high propensity for abuse. They've chosen that because there's strong market demand for their use cases to be served. And so building, I think one of the positives of these fights is that it is proven to be a catalyst for more movement on serving those use cases in the right way, or in a way that is defined and agreed upon, than we've seen in years past, than we see them in my entire career, in just 1 year, in under 1 year. And so that's like optimism. That's the optimism. But I do think that we're not there yet. It could all fall apart. And the worst thing to happen would be for provider executives, people at the provider involved in this, to think that it's just going to go away. Because if they don't work towards the outcome of getting involved and helping push forward something that's symmetric and a shared value, where they get back care gaps and clinical data and those sorts of things, then they're going to be in an asymmetric relationship where payers and other entities are pulling that data legally, but pulling that data and in such a way that they are completely disadvantaged as a business at a time when they have plenty of disadvantages as a business.
Sure. Already. You kind of mentioned that you see a risk that everything might fall apart. How real is that? And what is that risk? What is let's just do some doom scrolling here. What's the worst case scenario? Will it be that I'm sitting in my hospital or my doctor's office and I can't pull up a list of allergies from another hospital? Is that the worst case scenario?
When confronted with fights provoke fear. And when we feel fear, one natural reaction is to retreat, is to shelter, is to lean out, to move away. And so in that case, it's I put it as a low probability, but expected value or expected value is where you look at the probabilities and then the expected outcome and calculate the value. And in that 5% chance times these groups of providers retreating and saying, you know what, we can only trust other Epic providers. We Oracle groups can only trust other Oracle groups, or just getting away from overall exchange is so tremendously disruptive that patients would die. Like someone would miss a drug allergy interaction. Somebody would miss a prior condition that today they're just doing because they have access to that data and it's popping up and saying, whoa, they're on the diabetes meds or whatever. And so, I think in those terms that it's extremely important, not because it's a high probability, but because the outcome times the probability is so catastrophic for it's such a step back. It's a decade back for us in terms of health, America's health.
Okay. I mean, that's how it used to be, right? I will share information with certain groups because I have a relationship with those groups, and I will make it easy. Actually, we're not saying you refuse to share. I will make it easy to share. Right? Anyone can call up and fax a release and get that information, but it comes in a way that's not easily consumable. Did I get that right? Is that the direction that you think?
Yeah, just think if everyone chooses to retreat, they say we can't safely exchange information. We're risking HIPAA breach. We're risking patient privacy. The fear, uncertainty, and doubt of this future causes them to retreat away from these networks. I think what would occur is that all of a sudden you're lacking clinical data as a physician at the point of care that can be used to save lives and improve outcomes. And so, we have to work. We have to work to make that not happen at any cost.
All right, no more doom scrolling. Let's talk about doom in a different way. AI. So let me paint a picture, Brendan. Right now, or forever, it's been very difficult to exchange data because I need to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. I need a list of medications, and my amoxicillin has to be the same as your amoxicillin. Otherwise, we're not really sure what we're talking about. And then even when we know what we're talking about, my box 3 over here needs to go into your box A4, and if it doesn't go exactly right, and that's why we need engineers and developers such as yourself to make that happen. Listen, with AI, I don't need any of you because I'll just have the AI do it. Is that true, or am I extending it a little further than it would naturally go? I think it's probably not fully true, but can AI help us with some of this data mapping or making it kind of unnecessary to even know if you're talking about the same amoxicillin?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you're talking about data quality. And so if we don't regress 10 years in the past, that is a huge problem currently, right? With clinical data exchange in particular. So we're focusing on in the subset of interoperability, exchange of clinical data for, emergent treatment, for continuity of care, or even, to payers and others for those use cases we hinted at. That's all clinical data exchange. It's really hard because how do you codify the medications and the SIG data? How do you codify the diagnoses? How do you ensure it's structured in such a way that it, like you said, slots into the right places in all these different EHRs? That's part of standards job, but it's also, fully utilizing the standards, fully ensuring that you're using the same code systems, all these different small things that take a lot of work. AI will help. AI will help both on the demand side. AI is really hungry for well-structured data. And so, and AI is hungry for data, which increases the need for data exchange in general, and also help as a tool for mapping, for parsing, for structuring unstructured data. And so there's a ton of work being done now by different startups as well as established companies to, instead of just you're a doctor, you go and click the external documents tab and see a list of hundreds of summary documents, sorting through that and pulling out the things that are relevant to you as a pulmonologist or relevant to you as a dermatologist, which is a subset of all those things. And so AI is extremely effective even today. There's so many cool tools that are doing just that, these visit prep, where they're taking the hundreds of the cacophony of information exchanged over these networks and summarize exactly what you need for your specialty or even for your patient. I think that's one of the coolest developments of AI. It's definitely one of the most popular outside of like prior auth or like the admin stuff, which doesn't tick the box as much for me, even though there's good money to be had there, I think.
So let me just be clear. So AI is not taking every interface engineer's job in the next year, is what I'm hearing. But I can't trust you because you're one of those guys. Why would I trust you with this question?
I put this on the LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn poster now. I don't know what that means for me. I never imagined this happening, but I post on LinkedIn a lot. And one of the things I posted was the structuring of AI. So you have the co-pilots, and you have the agents. And people are afraid of the agents, these autonomous AI, anything that's doing AI autonomously. People are gravitating a lot more towards the co-pilots, the AI scribes, right? They sit alongside a provider. They don't replace the provider. And so that goes for developers too. They're gravitating towards GitHub Copilot and not these tools that are submitting a bunch of PRs. There's longer term upside to agents, to autonomous AI that does certain things, either entire roles or low level work for a specific role. So in the agent world, you can imagine, okay, the really hard mapping goes to the experienced person like Brendan, and then the low level agents perform the junior work. Or you could say the agents are so good at doing the QA task, but they're not good at doing the novel new file task. And so agents have longer term upside in almost any industry category subsegment, but people are afraid of them because they remove roles. They should not be. The art of the beauty of humanity is that with every new tool, we get rid of some meaningless work, and we move to something that's higher value. Right? We're not in the Industrial Revolution. Tons of roles were destroyed, that we don't walk back. We don't even look back on. And so I think the short term is there'll be tons of co-pilots that augment our ability to be a provider. Ambient scribes being a very popular and powerful one. I'm returning the physician back to just talking, to having the conversation. I think is just as a narrative really, really impactful, especially as they do more than just transcribe and actually do all the order placing, all the diagnoses, all the keystrokes that you'd have to do as a physician. Wow, that's awesome. And short term, really powerful. But there's something really cool about unlocking us to work on the most important, highest leverage uses of our talent. And I think that's the promise of the agents, which I don't love as a way we gravitated on this like spy verbiage for these. It's kind of nefarious, but those agents, if they can allow us to work at top of license and on really cool, interesting problems, then we get to evolve to the next set of things that we're all supposed to work on and to make to be doing 10x what we were doing before.
Yeah. All right. That's fair. That's less doomy. I thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm pretty optimistic. So you're going to hear me that flow through a lot of things. Well, I try to be realistic and paint the downside. There will be jobs lost, right? But the net benefit is that it opens up entirely new categories that we didn't even imagine possible.
Sure. You had referenced earlier that healthcare leaders, CEOs of healthcare systems, really need to be on top of what's going on. What would you suggest they do if we have a CEO or a COO listening? What should they be doing? Should they be talking to their CIO, talking to other executives?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a couple, I would talk to other executives. I would find your interop lead or whoever's in charge of this for your health system and say, what the hell is going on here? Do I have a status brief on this? How are we getting to a place where we are not strategically disadvantaged with our payer partners because of asymmetric relationships? Is one question. Do we have HIPAA breach risk because of this? And how are we getting to a place where we can move to use this as a catalyst to do better exchange with payers that we get back care gaps in clinical data and the things we need to be successful for value-based care programs or whatever initiatives we have, or at least how do we staunch the bleeding of losing leverage. You can go to your EHR vendor and push on them for the strategy there in these turbulent times. I think that's a no-brainer. And then, of course, they can get involved in care equality and Commonwealth and TEFCA and all these different initiatives across the industry. But I think start with the more tactical of is your organization on top of it? And then is your EHR vendor on top of it? Or like the must-dos if you haven't done them already.
Okay. And if I'm a CIO, I should be making sure to have these conversations with the boss.
Be ready. Be ready with the report and the strategy.
Okay, fair enough. Why don't we, one of my last questions will be about the future. So if you could kind of magically take us 10 years from now or 5 or 10 years from now, like assuming we get through the arguments we're having now and some of those lawsuits get resolved one way or the other, where do you think 5 to 10 years, are we going to be night and day different, or it's going to be like, well, we'll probably have prior auths figured out, but by then med reconciliation is going to be complicated again?
Here's my projection is that health tech has been mostly bipartisan in different ways. It's pushed forward in towards similar outcomes of patient access, focusing on subsets of interoperability to break down and make digital. I do think clinical data, these workflows will be nearly ubiquitous. And we will look back and say, why was this so weird and turbulent in a way? But like this actually occurs across industries when building these sorts of networks. Bank of America or America, when they founded the predecessor to Visa, man, it was on the ropes. And the leader of it, this guy D Hawk, who's just a legend, sort of held it together and got it through that time. And then now Visa and credit cards are ubiquitous in a way that we don't even question. But we should, it was at a time where Americans were not the Americans of today. They did not take on debt. They did not trust this flimsy little plastic card. And so there were so many challenges back then that are akin to the turbulence of right now that we can get through, and we will get through, and our children will be like, why was this such a problem? And so I look forward to my daughter just being like, not worrying about this. God, I don't want her to work in health tech, but whatever she does, she is just her health is where it needs to be for the use cases that she needs.
Yeah, you make a great point about Visa and MasterCard. Like that's most of us, we don't think about that anymore. So yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been great talking with you. We always like to end the conversation talking about design and anything in your life that is so well designed it brings you joy. So what is it? I'm assuming there's one thing, maybe two. Any thoughts?
I have two, and one's really kind of basic. So the Mocha Master is a coffee machine. I have dabbled. I'm not like a coffee snob, but I'm just like trying to what is the right balance of what's good, what's fast, and done like the caved glass thing. I forgot the name of that one. I've done I've lived in the Netherlands where they have like entirely different sets of coffee makers, and the Mocha Master is just like super fast. You prep it the night before and you just click it and it makes an awesome, full tank of it that stays hot for a long time. So I really like that. I have a full list of my daughter is 20 months old. So I've gone through and now assessed and ranked all the different baby gear out there. And so I have a great travel stroller. Maybe I can send you and we can include it as a link or something that just has waxed the really expensive Up a Baby type one that people recommended. So if anyone's like new parents looking at those things, I got a full set of recommendations and rankings. The SNU is a wonderful device. Do you know the SNU? Have you heard of this before?
I have not. We didn't have those things. We didn't have strollers when my children were small. We carried them by their hair.
Yeah, The SNU is
we didn't know any better, Brendan. We didn't know any better.
Tech-enabled bassinet, which sounds super bougie and whatever, but the baby falls asleep. Like, it's just crazy. The baby is like, she would cry. You put her in the SNU and then suddenly she's out, and it has all these features and stuff. But one killer feature is that it's FDA approved, that it prevents SIDS and things like that. So you're not only getting the nebulous benefits of like, my baby sleeps, like, well, maybe they'd sleep in a regular bassinet, but also preventing the off chance of SIDS and things like that. And so I think it's awesome. It is expensive. You can rent one. Anyway, those are I promised one. I gave you like 5.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan. This was great. It was, we had just the right amount of kind of bad news, but I think overall we're going in the right direction, and really helps all of us, helps patients, helps clinicians, and hopefully helps the bottom line of the healthcare systems that we all depend on to keep us healthy. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it, and good luck with that daughter of yours and all the high tech and low tech gear that you have to support her.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more on Brendan, follow him on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Brendan-Keeler, or see his work on Substack by following Health API Guy. That's Health API GUI. Check back for more episodes of Designing for Health wherever you listen to podcasts or on NordicGlobal.com. Till next time, we'll see you in network. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. This helps others find the podcast as well.